On March 20, 1998, in a small laboratory in Grove City, Ohio, Stanley Meyer stood before a room of investors and demonstrated something that should have been impossible. He connected 9-volt batteries to a device no larger than a briefcase. Water flowed in, hydrogen separated cleanly, efficiently, with almost no electrical input. The cell glowed with an eerie blue light. No combustion, no gasoline, just water splitting into fuel. Meyer had filed over 30 patents describing what he called a water fuel cell. The technology claimed to use electrical resonance to split water molecules at a fraction of the energy normally required. If it worked as described, it would eliminate the need for petroleum. Cars could run on tap water. Energy independence would become reality overnight. The implications stretched beyond transportation into power generation, global economics, geopolitical control. 2 weeks after that demonstration, Stanley Meyer sat down for dinner at a Grove City restaurant. He took a sip of cranberry juice, his face flushed. He grabbed his throat, stumbled outside into the parking lot, and collapsed. His brother Stephen rushed to his side. Meyer's last words: according to witnesses, they poisoned me. He was 57 years old. The official cause of death was listed as a cerebral aneurysm. His water fuel cell, the prototypes, the research, all of it, vanished from public record within months. This was not an isolated incident. Throughout the 20th century and into the 21st, a pattern emerged. Inventors developed technologies that threatened established energy monopolies, medical industries, or economic structures. They demonstrated working prototypes. They filed patents. They attracted attention. Then something shifted. Threats arrived. Laboratories burned. Prototypes disappeared. Inventors died under suspicious circumstances. Official investigations concluded nothing unusual occurred. The suppression was methodical, systematic. And it continues to this day. What follows are 10 documented cases of revolutionary inventions that were buried, destroyed, or erased, each supported by patents, witness testimony, and verifiable records. Each inventor believed they were creating something beneficial. Each discovered that certain innovations are not permitted to reach the public. Before Stanley Meyer demonstrated his water fuel cell in Grove City, there was another man who challenged the petroleum industry's dominance. Nikola Tesla stood in the shadow of his partially completed Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island in 1903. The tower stretched 187 feet into the air, topped with a copper dome 50 feet in diameter. Tesla envisioned it as the first of many wireless power transmission stations that would distribute electricity freely across vast distances. No wires, no meters, no centralized control. Tesla had already demonstrated wireless power transmission on a smaller scale. He illuminated light bulbs from across his laboratory without any physical connection. His Colorado Springs experiments produced artificial lightning bolts over 100 feet long and powered lights 25 miles away. The principles were sound. The physics worked. But the model required a fundamental shift in how electricity was delivered and how it was monetized. J.P. Morgan had initially funded Wardenclyffe with $150,000. But when Tesla explained that the system would provide free energy that couldn't be metered or controlled, Morgan withdrew support immediately. Construction halted. Creditors seized the property. By 1917, the tower was demolished for scrap metal. Tesla died in 1943 in a New York hotel room, impoverished and largely forgotten. FBI agents arrived at the hotel within hours of his death and confiscated all his papers, research notes, and prototypes. Those documents were classified and have never been fully released. What Tesla proposed threatened more than just electrical companies. It threatened the entire infrastructure of metered energy distribution. If power could be transmitted wirelessly and tapped freely from the atmosphere, centralized control evaporates. Revenue models collapse. The tower was destroyed not because the technology failed, but because it succeeded too well. While Tesla's tower was being dismantled in New York, across the country in San Diego, another inventor was developing technology that would challenge a different monopoly. In 1920, Royal Raymond Rife constructed the first universal microscope, capable of magnification up to 60,000 times. Unlike electron microscopes that destroyed specimens, Rife's instrument used resonant light frequencies to observe living organisms without killing them. What Rife observed through his microscope changed everything. He identified specific frequencies at which bacteria and viruses could be destroyed. Each pathogen, he claimed, had a unique resonant frequency, Apply the correct frequency, and the organism literally shook itself apart. No chemicals, no side effects, just targeted electromagnetic energy. Between 1934 and 1937, Rife treated 16 terminal cancer patients at a clinic in Loyola, California. 14 recovered completely within 3 months. The results were documented by physicians, including Dr. Milbank Johnson, who chaired a special medical research committee to investigate Rife's work. Multiple doctors witnessed the treatments. The frequencies were specific, repeatable, verifiable. Then the American Medical Association intervened. Maurice Fishbein, head of the AMA, demanded control of Rife's technology. Rife refused. Within months, laboratories were broken into. Research papers vanished. Dr. Milbank Johnson, who was preparing to announce Rife's results to the medical community, died suddenly the night before his scheduled press conference. The official cause was listed as heart failure, though he had shown no prior symptoms. Other doctors who supported Rife were threatened with loss of medical licenses. Equipment was destroyed. Rife himself was driven into alcoholism and obscurity. By 1939, nearly all records of the successful cancer treatments had been erased. The few machines that survived were seized and dismantled. Rife's universal microscope disappeared entirely. No working models exist today. The frequency technology that could have revolutionized medicine was buried under threats, intimidation, and systematic destruction of evidence. The pattern repeats with disturbing consistency. When Eugene Mallove published research supporting cold fusion in 2004, he was beaten to death in his home 5 days before a scheduled conference. The murder was officially attributed to a robbery gone wrong, though nothing was stolen. Mallove had been the chief science writer at MIT and editor of Infinite Energy magazine. His work challenged the scientific establishment's dismissal of cold fusion, a form of nuclear fusion that could occur at room temperature, producing clean energy without radiation. Cold fusion had been announced in 1989 by Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons at the University of Utah. They claimed to produce excess heat through electrochemical reactions involving palladium and deuterium. The scientific community responded with immediate ridicule. Replication attempts failed, though later analysis revealed those attempts used different protocols than the original experiment. Funding evaporated. Careers were destroyed. But Mallove had obtained internal MIT documents proving that key data had been altered to discredit cold fusion. Temperature measurements showing excess heat were changed to show no anomaly. The manipulation was intentional. Mallove went public with these findings. He criticized MIT's handling of the research. He argued that cold fusion deserved serious investigation despite the initial controversies. 5 days before the International Conference on Condensed Matter Nuclear Science in 2004, where Mallove was scheduled to present further evidence, he was killed. 2 suspects were eventually convicted of manslaughter, claiming they attacked Mallove during a dispute over rental property. No scientific documents were taken. His research files remained untouched. The timing, supporters insist, was not coincidental. Cold fusion research continues in obscurity, underfunded and marginalized. The technology that could provide limitless clean energy remains on the fringe of accepted science, dismissed by the same institutions that altered data to suppress it. Sometimes suppression doesn't require murder. Sometimes it only requires corporate control and strategic dismantling. In 1996, General Motors launched the EV1, the first mass-produced electric vehicle designed from the ground up. It could travel up to 140 miles on a single charge. It accelerated from 0 to 60 in under 8 seconds. Drivers loved it. Demand exceeded supply. The EV1 was only available through lease, never for sale. Approximately 1,100 vehicles were leased between 1996 and 2003. Drivers reported minimal maintenance costs, whispered quiet operation, and enthusiasm for the zero-emission technology. Waiting lists formed. Environmental groups celebrated. The future of transportation seemed to be shifting. Then, in 2003, General Motors abruptly canceled the program. The company reclaimed every single leased EV1, despite desperate pleas from drivers who wanted to purchase their vehicles. Offers to buy the cars outright were refused. GM claimed there was insufficient demand, though this contradicted the documented waiting lists and customer petitions. The automaker stated that continuing the program was not economically viable. Every EV1 was systematically destroyed. Most were crushed at a facility in Mesa, Arizona. A few were donated to museums and universities with their powertrains disabled, rendering them inoperable. Drivers who had fallen in love with their vehicles watched helplessly as they were hauled away and destroyed. The official explanation cited the high cost of production and limited consumer interest, but internal documents later revealed that GM had lobbied aggressively against California's zero-emission vehicle mandate. The EV1 had been created to satisfy that mandate, not to succeed as a product. When the mandate was rolled back partly due to pressure from automakers and oil companies, GM eliminated the evidence that electric vehicles could work. Crushing every EV1 ensured no secondary market would emerge, no independent mechanics could maintain them, no competitors could reverse engineer them. The technology was erased as thoroughly as if it had never existed. General Motors proceeded to invest heavily in hydrogen fuel cell research or technology that would require new infrastructure, ensuring corporate control of the supply chain. The EV1 proved electric vehicles were viable. Then it was destroyed to prevent that proof from spreading. What if those 1,100 vehicles had been allowed to remain in service, demonstrating their reliability year after year? Would the electric vehicle transition have accelerated a decade earlier? In the realm of energy generation, Thomas Townsend Brown developed technology that seemed to defy accepted physics. In the 1920s, while still a student, Brown discovered that capacitors experience a net thrust in the direction of the positive electrode when charged with high voltage. He called this electrogravitics, the interaction between electrical charge and gravitational fields. Brown spent decades developing the technology, eventually creating flying disc prototypes that hovered and moved without any conventional propulsion system. In 1952, he demonstrated these devices to the U.S. Navy. The discs flew in controlled patterns, powered only by high-voltage electricity, no fuel, no moving parts, just electrostatic thrust. The Navy classified Brown's work immediately. He was told his research had potential military applications and must remain secret. Brown continued his research privately, demonstrating his electrokinetic devices in France in the 1950s, where they attracted significant interest. French aerospace companies investigated the technology. Aviation Week published articles describing Brown's demonstrations, then silence. Funding dried up. Military contracts evaporated. Brown's work faded into obscurity, labeled as pseudoscience by mainstream physicists. The official stance was that electrogravitics violated known laws of physics and couldn't possibly work despite documented demonstrations and military interest. Brown died in 1985, his life's work dismissed and his technology buried under classification and ridicule. Decades later, patents filed by aerospace corporations describe propulsion systems remarkably similar to Brown's electrogravitics. The technology wasn't impossible. It was classified, reverse-engineered, and appropriated. Brown's public demonstrations were suppressed, not because they failed, but because they succeeded in ways that challenged existing aerospace monopolies. Sometimes inventors are neutralized through different means. Lester Hendershot claimed to have developed a fuelless generator in 1920 ATA device that produced electrical energy without any external power source. He demonstrated it publicly, generating enough power to operate radios and motors. Military officials and investors witnessed the demonstrations. Major newspapers covered the story. Hendershot was invited to demonstrate the device for Charles Lindbergh at Selfridge Airfield in Michigan. The demonstration succeeded. Lindbergh confirmed the device operated without any apparent power source. But shortly after, Hendershot suffered a mysterious nervous breakdown. He was committed to a mental institution for several months. When released, he refused to discuss the generator publicly and withdrew from all attempts to commercialize the technology. Years later, Hendershot attempted to revive his work but faced continuous harassment and intimidation. His laboratory was broken into multiple times. Prototypes disappeared. He reported receiving death threats if he continued. By the 1960s, Hendershot abandoned the technology entirely, taking whatever secrets remained to his grave in 1961. No working Hendershot generator exists today. The principles behind its operation were never fully disclosed. Skeptics claimed it was a hoax, yet no one could explain how it functioned during witnessed demonstrations. The technology simply vanished, along with the man who created it. Philo Farnsworth, the inventor of electronic television, spent the final years of his life working on something he believed was more important than television. In the 1960s, Farnsworth developed the fuser, a small, tabletop device designed to achieve nuclear fusion. Unlike massive tokamak reactors requiring enormous energy inputs, Farnsworth's fuser used electrostatic confinement to create fusion reactions at room temperature in a device small enough to fit on a desk. The fuser produced genuine fusion reactions, generating neutrons that confirmed nuclear fusion was occurring. Farnsworth patented the design in 1966 and believed it could eventually lead to practical fusion power generation. He demonstrated the device to potential investors and secured funding from ITT Corporation to continue development. But Farnsworth died in 1971 before the technology could be fully developed. ITT abandoned the fusion research almost immediately, citing insufficient commercial potential. The patents lapsed. The prototypes were dismantled. Farnsworth's fuser, which had proven that desktop fusion was achievable, disappeared from mainstream research. Decades later, amateur scientists and hobbyists rediscovered Farnsworth's work and built their own fusers, confirming that the technology was genuine. High school students have constructed working fusers for science fairs. The principles are sound. The fusion reactions are real. But institutional fusion research has ignored the fuser approach entirely, focusing instead on multi-billion-dollar tokamak and laser confinement projects that have consumed decades of funding without producing net energy gain. Why was Farnsworth's compact, demonstrably functional approach abandoned? Because desktop fusion, if perfected, couldn't be monopolized. It was too simple, too decentralizable, too accessible. The technology threatened centralized energy control. In 1984, John Bedini began demonstrating what he called energizer circuits, devices that appeared to charge batteries using less energy than they produced. Bedini's circuits used electromagnetic pulses to charge batteries while simultaneously powering motors and lights. He claimed the devices were tapping radiant energy from the environment, a form of energy Tesla had described decades earlier. Bedini openly shared his designs, publishing diagrams and encouraging replication. Thousands of experimenters worldwide built Bedini devices and reported similar results: batteries that charged faster than they depleted, motors that ran longer than expected, energy outputs exceeding conventional calculations. The technology seemed to violate thermodynamics, yet the measurements persisted across independent tests. Mainstream science dismissed Bedini's work as measurement error or misunderstanding of basic physics. No major research institution investigated the claims seriously. Bedini received no grants, no academic support, no recognition. He died in 2016, his life's work relegated to the fringe of free energy enthusiasts and dismissed inventors. Yet the devices still work. Plans are freely available online. Anyone can build a Bedini energizer circuit with basic components. The energy anomalies continue to be reported. The technology persists in underground networks of experimenters who refuse to accept that it's impossible. But without institutional validation or commercial development, Bedini's work remains marginalized, another technology that threatens the established energy paradigm and is therefore ignored into obscurity. Paul Panton developed the GET fuel processor in the 1980s, claiming it could reduce emissions and increase fuel efficiency by up to 300%. The system used a plasma reactor to pre-process fuel, breaking it down into a fine mist that burned more completely. Pantone demonstrated engines running on contaminated motor oil, even mixtures containing 80% water. Emissions dropped dramatically. Fuel consumption decreased. The technology worked on generators, vehicles, industrial engines. Panton filed patents and began licensing the technology to individuals worldwide. Hundreds of people built GET processors and reported success. Videos documented engines running on fuels that should have been unusable. Independent tests confirmed emission reductions and efficiency gains. Then Pantone ran into legal trouble. In 2005, he was convicted of securities fraud for selling unregistered securities related to his technology. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Supporters claimed the charges were a pretext to silence him, that the technology threatened oil companies and automotive manufacturers. Pantone insisted he was targeted because his invention worked too well. During his imprisonment, Pantone's mental health deteriorated. He was held in psychiatric facilities and reportedly given medications against his will. When finally released in 2011, his ability to promote the technology had been destroyed. He died in 2015, largely forgotten. The GEAT fuel processor, however, continues to be built by experimenters. Plans remain available. The technology hasn't disappeared completely, but it has been prevented from commercial development or mainstream adoption. No major automotive manufacturer has investigated Pantone's work. No environmental agency has studied its emission reduction potential. The technology that could have reduced pollution and fuel dependency remains on the fringe, its inventor silenced and discredited. These 10 cases span different decades, different technologies, different fields, yet the pattern is identical. An inventor develops something revolutionary. Demonstrations prove it works. Patents are filed. Attention arrives from investors, from the public, from those who control existing industries. Then suppression begins. Sometimes the inventor dies suddenly, heart attack, aneurysm, beaten to death in what's called a random crime. Sometimes they're driven into poverty, alcoholism, mental breakdown. Sometimes they're imprisoned on dubious charges. Sometimes their laboratories burn, their prototypes vanish, their research is confiscated and classified. The technologies themselves are diverse: wireless energy, water, fuel cells, frequency medicine, electric vehicles, fusion reactors, fuel processors, electrogravitics, fuelless generators. But they share common threads to establish power structures. They promise decentralization of energy production. They threaten petroleum monopolies, pharmaceutical profits, automotive industry control. Most critically, they offer independence, energy that can't be metered, medicine that can't be patented indefinitely, transportation that doesn't require centralized fuel distribution. These inventions shift power from institutions to individuals, and that shift cannot be tolerated by those who profit from dependency. The suppression is not random. It follows a methodology. First, ridicule the inventor, labeled the technology as pseudoscience or impossible. Second, if the technology persists, offer to buy it or control it. When the inventor refuses, escalate. Third, destroy the evidence. Seize prototypes, classify research, eliminate documentation. Fourth, neutralize the inventor through death, imprisonment, bankruptcy, or madness. The pattern has repeated for over a century. How many other inventions have been suppressed that we don't know about? How many inventors gave up after the first threat, never going public? How many technologies were classified before they could be demonstrated? The cost is incalculable. We're told technological progress moves at a natural pace, limited by scientific understanding and engineering capabilities. But what if that's false? What if the pace of progress has been artificially slowed, deliberately limited to protect existing industries and centralize control? Stanley Meyer's water fuel cell could have ended petroleum dependency in the 1990s. Tesla's wireless energy could have provided free power in the 1900s. Rife's frequency therapy could have revolutionized medicine in the 1930s. Each suppressed invention represents not just a lost opportunity, but a deliberate choice by those in power to prevent transformation. The inventors believed they were helping humanity. They died thinking they had failed, but they didn't fail. Their technologies worked. The demonstrations were real. The patents were valid. What failed was a system that cannot tolerate disruption, even when that disruption would benefit millions. We live in a world shaped not by what's possible, but by what's permitted. The technologies described herein, countless others proved that different futures were achievable. Those futures were stolen, not by technical failure, but by systematic suppression executed through threats, violence, and erasure. The question isn't whether these technologies could have worked. The evidence shows they did work. The question is what other innovations are being suppressed right now, in this moment, to protect industries that should have been obsolete decades ago. If these stories intrigue you, consider subscribing to Investigator Scroll. There are more buried inventions, more silenced voices, more mysteries waiting to surface. What other technologies have been erased from history? Share your theories in the comments below.